Deja vu. I'm back from a false start. I ran and got a tree of life here for us. We are following Lola Daydream up the tree of life. And we've gotten to the where she got married to her fairy prince. So we will follow it. Hang on. We are at part 3. You mustn't suppose the honeymoon is ever really over, because it just isn't. But he said to me, "Princess, you haven't been all over the palace yet. Your special house is the 3rd. Okay, your special house is the 3rd. You know, because it's so convenient to the 2nd where I live." So Lola lives there, or at least she has her apartments there. And the fairy prince has his in number 2. Where I usually live. The king, my father, lives in the 1st. And there's a footnote that says caput tendidum, or the white hair. Okay. The king, my father, lives in the 1st, and he's never to be seen, you know. He's very, very old nowadays. I'm practically regent, of course. You must never forget that I am really he. Only 1 generation back is not so far, and I entirely represent his thought. Soon, he whispered, ever so softly, you will be a mother, and there will be a fairy prince again to run away with another little sleepyhead, pretty little sleepyhead. And then there's a marginal note that Hebrew and Latin that says ama erit aima. So ama, mother, turns to, and then the same Hebrew letters that spell mother, but the phallic yod is stuck in it. So it's the mother interpenetrated with the essence of the Father. Ama erit aima. Okay. But I digress. Then I saw that when my fairy prince, when fairy princes, not princesses, but when fairy princes are really and truly married, they become fairy kings. And that I was quite wrong ever to be ashamed of being only a little girl and afraid of spoiling his prospects. Because really, you see, he could never become king and have a son, a fairy prince, without me. So remember that the next time you beat yourself up. But one can only do that by getting to the 3rd house, and it's a dreadful journey. I do most honestly assure you. There are 2 passages. One from the 8th house and one from the 6th. Okay, so that would be the one from the 8th house and one from the 6th. Oyen and Lamed. We're heading for number 5 there, okay? Let's see. The first one is all water. And the second one almost worse, because you have to balance yourself so carefully or you fall and hurt yourself. To go through the first, you must be painted all over with blood up to your waist. And you cross your legs. And then they put a rope around one angle and swing you off. I had such a pretty white petticoat on, and my prince and I looked just like a white pyramid with a huge red cross on top of it, which made me ever so glad, because I now knew I would be savior of the world, which is what one wants to be, isn't it? Only sometimes the world means all the other children in the dreams, and sometimes the dream itself, and sometimes the wake things one sees before one is quite awake. The prince tells me that really and truly only in the first house where his father lived was really a wake house. And all the others had a little sleep house about them. And the further you got, the more awake you were and began to know just how much dream was dream and how much wake. Now it says via Lamed, and that's the path of Lamed, leading up from, path of Lamed, leading up from 8 to 5, from beauty to severity. Okay. Then there was another passage where there was a narrow edge of green crystal, which was all you had to walk on, and there was a beautiful blue feather balancing on the edge. And if you described the feather, and if you disturbed the feather, there was a lady with a sword. Okay. And she would cut off your head. So I didn't dare hardly to breathe. And all around, there were thousands and thousands of beautiful people in green who danced and danced like anything. And at the end, there was a terrible door of the fifth house, the royal armory. Severity, that's the sphere of Mars. And when we came in, the house was full of steel machinery, some red hot and some white hot, and the din was simply fearful. So to get the noise out of my head, I took a little whip and whipped myself till all my blood poured down over everything, and I saw the whole house like a cataract of foaming blood rushing headlong from the flaming and scintillating star of five that blazed and blazed in the incandescent dome. And everything went red before my eyes, and a great flame, like a strong wind, blew through the house, with a noise louder than any thunder could possibly be, so that I couldn't hold myself hardly. And I took up the sharp knives of the machines and cut myself all over, and the noise got louder and louder, and the flame burnt through and through me, so that I was very glad when my prince said, "You wouldn't think it, but would you, sweetheart? But there are lots of people who stay here all their lives." There are 3 ways to the fourth house. The fourth house. And there's 3 ways. Do you see them? Kaf, Yud, and tet. The first passage is a very curious place, full of wheels. Full of wheels. There's calf, see? Wheels. And ever such strange creatures like monkeys and sphinxes and jackals climbing about them, trying to get to the top. Okay, a classic wheel has a Hermanubis, jackal, Typhon, and the Sphinx. Now, they're not stagnant. One is always on top, and one is always trying to get on top. And he's only on top for a little while, and then comes the snake, and then comes the... Okay, you get the picture. It was very silly because there isn't really any top to a wheel at all. The place you want to get to is the center if you want to be quiet. There was a really lovely passage, like a deep wood in springtime. The dearest old man came along who had lived there all his life because he was the guardian of it. Where is that dear old man? These, of course, are the BOTA images that I colored myself and lined stuff about 50 years ago. The dear old man. He lived there all his life because he was the guardian of it. And he didn't need to travel because he belonged to the first house, really, from the very beginning. He wore a vast cloak and he carried a lamp and a long stick. And he said the cloak meant that you were to be silent and not to say anything you saw, and the lamp meant that you were to tell everybody and make them glad. And the stick was like a guide to tell you which to do. But I didn't quite believe that because I'm getting a grown-up girl now, and I wasn't to be put off like that. I could see that the stick was really a measuring rod with which the whole palace was built, and the lamp was the only light they had to build it by. And the cloak was the abyss of darkness that covers it all up. That's why dream people never see beautiful things like I'm telling you about. And their houses are built of common red bricks. And they sit in them all day and play silly games with counters. And oh dear me, how they do cheat and quarrel when one gets 1,000,000 counters. He is so glad you can't think and goes away and tries to change some of the counters for the things he really wants, and he can't. So you nearly die of laughing, though of course it would be dreadfully sad if it were wake life. But I was telling you about the ways to the fourth house. And the third way is full of lions. And that is the horizontal path from 5 to 6. Okay. Let's see, it says, hang on, I lost my place here. Full of lions And a person might be afraid only whenever one comes to bite at you. There's a lovely lady who puts her hands in its mouth and shuts it. So we went through quite safely, and I thought of Daniel in the lion's den. The fourth house. Okay, there's the fourth house, the sphere of Jupiter. Now, that's the last, I'm going to digress here for a second. That's the last Sephira before we start to have to deal with the abyss and the supernal triad and the queen's real house and the king's real house and the father with the white hair. So, because this is the highest Sephira below the abyss, it's the very highest things, the macrocosm people, the sleepy people. It's the highest thing people with their meat brains can think about. And so they think that's God. So when we think of God and everybody talks about their God and everything else, that's who they're formulating, making a form of, trying to bottle up that idea. And that's it, the highest one. That's Jupiter, that's Zeus, who's king of the gods because he's in a dimension that's so limited, he doesn't even know that there were three qualities went into making him. That's the demiurgos, the god that thinks it's God but ain't God. Zeus, Jupiter, Jove, Jehovah, Yod He Vav He, the great four-letter name of God. But I digress. The fourth house is the most wonderful of all I've ever seen. It is the most heavenly blue mansion. It is built of beryl and amethyst and lapis lazuli and turquoise and sapphire. The center of the floor is a pool of purest aquamarine, and in it is water. Only you can see every drop as a separate crystal. And the blue tinge filtering through the light. Above there hangs a calm yet mighty globe of deep sapphirine blue, and around it there were 9 mirrors. And there is a noise that means, when you understand, joy, joy, joy. There are violet flames darting through the air, and each one a little sob of happy love. One began to see that the dream world was really 4 at last. Every time one kissed one for real love, it was a little throb of violet flame in that beautiful house in the wake world. And we bathed and swam in the pool, and we were so happy you can't think. But they said, little girl, you must pay for the entertainment. I forgot to tell you that there was music like fountains make when they rise and fall, only of course much more wonderful than that. So I asked, what must I pay? And they said, you're now mistress of all these houses from the 4th to the 9th. You've managed the servants' hall well enough since your marriage, and now you must manage the others. because till you do, you can never get to the third house. So I said, it seems to me that they are all in perfectly good order. But they took me up in the air, and I saw that the outsides were horribly disfigured, with great advertisements, and every single house had written on it, "First house. This is His Majesty's favorite residence, no other genuine. Beware worthless imitations. Come here and spend life. Come here and see the snake eat its tail." So I was furious, as you may imagine, that had men go out and put all the proper numbers on them and the little sarcastic remarks to make them ashamed. So they read, "Fifth house, and mostly dream at that. Seventh house, external splendor and internal corruption," and so on. And on each I put, "No thoroughfare from here to the first house. The only way out is out of doors. The only way is out of doors, by order." This was frightfully annoying because in the old days, we could walk about inside everywhere and not get wet if it rained. But nowadays, there isn't any way from the fourth to the third house. You could go, of course, by chariot from the fifth to the third. Okay. From the fifth to the third. Chet, the path of the chariot. Let's see. Or through the house where the twins live, from the sixth to the third. But that isn't allowed unless you've been to the fourth house too and go from there at the same time. There's the Gemini one from the fifth to the third. Let's see. It was here they told me what T-A-R-O on the ring meant. First it meant gate. And that's the name of my fairy prince when you spell it in full, letter by letter. That's the numeration of Adonai. There are 78 parts to it, which make a perfect plan for the whole palace, so you can always find your way if you remember to say T-A-R-O. Then you remember INRI was on the ring too. INRI is short for LVX, which means the brilliance of the wide wake light. And that too is the name of my fairy prince, only spelled short. The Romans said it had 65 parts, which is 5 times 13. And 78 is 6 times 13. To get into the wake world, you must know your 13 times tables quite well. So if you take them both together, that makes 11 times 13. And when you say abrahadabra, which is a most mysterious word because it has 11 letters in it, you remember that the houses are numbered both ways, so that the third house is also called the eighth house too, and the fifth house the sixth, and so on. So you can't tell what lovely things that means till you've been through them all and get to the very end. So when you look at the ring and see INRI and TARO on it, that means that is like a policeman keeping on saying, "Pass along, please." I would have liked to stay in the fourth house all my life, but I began to see it was just a little dream house too. and I couldn't rest because my own house was the very next one. But it's too awful to tell you how I got there. You want the most fearful lot of courage, and there's no one to help you, nobody at all, and there's no proper passage. But it's frightfully exciting, and you must wait till the next time before I tell you how I started that horrible journey, and if I ever got there or not. And that's where we'll pick it up tomorrow. Again, we're reading from Crowley's The Wake World, a tale for babes and sucklings, with explanatory notes in Hebrew and Latin for the use of the wise and prudent. Do you have anything to add, dear?
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you because of the washing machine.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I want you to know that using these 50-year-old cards, here's the box they came in that has held together for all these 50 years, and the lid finally has come out because I've been using it to share with you. Don't you feel guilty? Don't. What was I saving them for? The cards are still in good shape, and I'm going to repair the box. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.